All right, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, or wherever you're looking at this live stream from. Welcome to this panel session and presentation session hosted by Wage Indicator Foundation and the Center for the Central European Labor Studies Institute, or CELSI, one of our main research partners. Today, we are discussing the gig economy, and more specifically, our presentations around fairness in flux, or navigating the gig economy through regulatory innovation and collective bargaining. We will be having 3 presentations from a couple of speakers who I will quickly introduce, and we will have a panel discussion afterwards to dive a bit deeper into the topics that we discussed during the presentations. We obviously welcome questions and discussion points in both the app as well as in the Zoom chat and in the room from Fred. So feel welcome to also engage with us during the session. We will be having a quick introduction by Marta Kanakova from CELSI on the topic, then a presentation from Iftikhar Ahmad on the regulatory framework in the gig economy, a presentation from Marta and Nina from CELSI on collective bargaining in the gig economy, and the introduction to the recently developed living tariff tool by Wage Indicator by Pauline Osse, Daniela Cecon, and Nadia Palazzari from Gajimu on the living tariff tool. And afterwards, we will have a panel discussion with the same speakers and Martijn Arets, who's also here with us today, who's a global platform expert. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Marta Kanakova, who will introduce the topic for us today.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, or good evening to Nadia. Let me start briefly with the aim of this session and how it fits with the general conference theme. The conference looks at the implications, the various diverse implications of the internet and related technologies. And since we are researchers and analytics working in the field of working life, we try to connect these two topics. So we are looking at the consequences of internet and technologies for working life and for labor market in general. And therefore, the current session will look at or zoom more closely at the different regulatory models that are out there for the gig economy from a global perspective. We will also look and evaluate the challenges and opportunities that are there that the regulation of the gig economy is facing. And we will explore the feasibility of collective bargaining and the state of collective bargaining that is already out there for gig workers' rights and working conditions. And the most important part of this session is to discuss some innovative tools and approaches to regulation in the gig economy. And one of these tools will be introduced, and the aim of this tool is to empower the gig workers, their decision-making, and also their awareness of their rights and working conditions. So this is roughly what the session is about. And Fiona, back to you with calling on in one presentation after the other.
Thanks, Marta. So unfortunately, Iftikhar could not be with us on the live stream today, but he recorded a video for us. So I'm with the video introducing Iftikhar Ahmad, who is the labor law expert from the Wage Indicator Foundation based in Pakistan. And he looks at the regulatory framework for gig workers currently in the world, global. Iftikhar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Iftikhar Ahmed. I am a labor law specialist at the Wage Indicator Foundation. I'm also the founder of Center for Labor Research. Center for Labor Research is the global labor law office of the Wage Indicator Foundation. I'll be talking about the regulatory landscape in the platform economy. And before I go into detail, I'd like to make 2 points. The platform economy has created employment opportunities to millions of people. Although no exact numbers are available, but it is estimated that it is contributing to around 12% of the employment of the global labor force. So it is more than 400 million people who are earning their livelihood through the platform economy. First thing. Second relates to the regulation of the platform economy, and that comes with a question. The question is, and that we all need to ask ourselves, is whether we consider the access to decent work as a fundamental human right or not. And whether we want this access to decent work for the platform workers or not. Because that will determine what kind of options do we want to use for giving these workers some of the fundamental and basic rights. But before we delve into details, I would like to start my presentation with 5 gaps that exist in the platform economy and that must be focus of any of the reforms that are happening in the countries. And they already are the focus of reforms. The first is regarding the wage gaps. Second is regarding the right gaps, where the employment classification is done in such a way that the workers are deprived of their rights. Then there are social protection gaps. Then there is lack of transparency that leads to the transparency gaps, and then poor working conditions and safety that leads to the working conditions gaps. The wage gaps are because the platform work, especially the on-location platform work, is low-paid work, and workers are often barely making the minimum wages, let alone the living wage. When you look into the work-related costs, there's also a phenomenon of platform debt or negative incomes, where the cost of working with the platform exceeds whatever you are getting from the platform. So there are so many working poor who are working, but they are living below the poverty line. Then there's issue of employment misclassification that leads to the rights gaps. The classification of platform workers as independent contractors rather than employees raises concerns. It deprives them access to certain employment benefits that the labor laws give. And to me, this is bogus self-employment and deprives the platform workers of the protection of traditional labor rights and benefits, such as minimum wages, social security, paid leave, and healthcare. Then there's an issue of limited social protection. Platform workers often lack access to social protection, such as unemployment benefits, worker compensation in the event of an accident or disease, and retirement plans. The absence of a safety net makes them vulnerable, especially in those periods when the work is low. And this happened during the times of COVID. Lack of transparency. Platform workers often face challenges related to the rating systems. They don't know how they are being rated and how the jobs are being given to them. They may experience unfair treatment, discrimination, and don't have very clear forums for talking about their grievances. The poor working conditions and safety that leads to the working conditions gaps. The platform workers may face long working hours, lone working. They have physically demanding tasks and unsafe working conditions. The next question is how we can right these wrongs, and there are different ways to do it. And I would like to give you a glimpse of how the platform themselves, the trade unions, the courts, and the governments are doing it. So the first is self-regulation by the platforms. There's a crowdsourcing code of conduct. It started in 2015. It has 10 principles, such as fair payment, only serious tasks, and open and transparent communication. 10 platforms have already signed the code of conduct. In 2017, there was established an office to effectively implement the code of conduct and resolve any disputes between workers and signatory platforms. In 2020, the World Economic Forum Charter of Principles for Good Platform Work, it was signed by the major digital labor platforms, including Cabify, Uber, Deliveroo, and Grab. The Charter commits the platforms to diversity and inclusion, safety and well-being, flexibility and fair conditions, reasonable pay and fees, and social protection, and so many other issues. Then there's Glovo Courier's Pledge. Glovo introduced a Courier's Pledge in 2021. It is being implemented in 17 countries today. The pledge rests on 4 pillars, and the most important of those is fair earnings and safety. And there's also the 2 remaining pillars of community and equality. Glovo establishes a recommended level of wages per hour based on the data provided by the Wage Indicator Foundation. Then there's regulation of the working conditions of the platform workers through collective bargaining. We've taken this table from a working paper by the ILO. It shows data till 2022, the start of 2022. Till then, more than 10 collective agreements were signed between the platforms and the platform workers. Majority of those agreements were concluded in Europe. And it's important that 9 of those collective agreements focused on food delivery, 1 agreement focused on the transport sector, and 1 agreement on cleaning. And there are 2 agreements which are outside Europe. 1 is in Chile and 1 is in Republic of Korea. So it's important, and I'm sure during the last 2 years, many more have been signed, or at least these have been revised. So this is important that the collective bargaining, although these are the very starting agreements, these are more of a trial, but these agreements are happening. Then there is regulation of platform workers' working conditions through case laws. According to the database maintained by the Wage Indicator through its collaboration with Fair Work Foundation, Gigpedia, out of the 80 court cases, more than 60 have been decided in favor of workers, which means that these give workers certain rights that they were denied by the platforms. And you can have a look at these court cases. I am not going to repeat them. These are all the court cases, and their review is given on the page of Wikipedia and is there. Regulation through legislation. The governments themselves are trying to regulate the platform work. And in some countries, the focus is on clearing the employment misclassification issue. And that's why in US and in some of the European countries, the focus was on the employment misclassification and to give a clear employment status to the platform workers. It happened in Spain through the coming up of the law on the riders. Then there is an upcoming EU directive on platform work, which hopefully will set the stage for clear employment status for platform workers. But if you look at this map, there in this southern part of the world, the focus is also on social security, and it is happening in Brazil, in India, in Indonesia, in Korea. The focus of countries is more on giving these workers access to social protection, social security. And then there are also countries like China, like Chile, like Greece, Delhi, where the focus is on creating a new category with which these workers would be given certain rights. Yes, not all the rights, but to give them some of the rights that the general workers have. And then in some countries, for example, in Pakistan, the law on sexual harassment was extended to the platform workers as well. In South Africa, similarly, the non-discrimination law has been extended to the platform workers as well. In two of the countries in Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania, the focus is more on capping the commissions, how much commissions that the platforms can charge from whatever the platform workers are getting through their rights and deliveries. There must be so many examples, but these are the key examples that I wanted to quote. So what kind of rights should the platform workers have? I would like to refer to the universal labor guarantees or the basic labor protections, and that every worker should have access to, in the form of access to the fundamental worker rights, a set of basic working conditions, and access to basic social protection. The fundamental workers' rights, as we all know, include the right to unionize and collective bargaining, freedom from forced and child labor, and freedom from discrimination, and access to safe and healthy workplaces. A set of basic working conditions include the living wage, which allows you to have a livable life, and limits on the total hours of work that a person is working. The basic social protections that every worker should have access to are in the form of state-regulated old age survivors, disability, and work injury benefits, and also social protection in the case when you are not able to find work. I hope this review of the regulation in platform economy, whether through self-regulation by the platforms, whether through collective bargaining between the platform workers and the platforms, and the regulation through case laws or regulation through lawmaking by the government, it gives you an idea of what is happening in the platform economy around the world. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot to Iftikhar Ahmad for this presentation. I would now like to give the floor to Marta Kahankova from CELSI, who will walk us through the discussion around collective bargaining and if it has a role in regulating work for the platform economy. Marta, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can see my slides now.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So following up on Iftikhar, who already opened the discussion with good examples and some relevant questions on regulation being extended onto the platform or the gig workers, which is really a fundamental question in social sciences these days, I would like to contribute with looking at a slightly other form of regulation, namely collective bargaining. We all know that collective bargaining is not yet the main tool, or is not the most important regulatory tool in many countries, but still, at least in Europe, it's very important. And the question is whether it is an option for the gig economy also, and whether there have been already some efforts to integrate workers from the gig economy into collective bargaining. So my presentation will focus largely on some European examples, but the questions are also relevant from a global perspective, and we can then expand more to the global perspective with the next presentations. So the basic question that I'm going to discuss is whether collective bargaining can reduce the imbalance of power that is very often flagged in the relationship between the platform or the so-called employer, or the platform replacing the employer as we understand employers in the traditional way, and the workers in the gig economy. So whether collective bargaining can help the gig workers in bringing them more rights, more power in the contractual relationship with the platform. So The presentation is structured in the following points. I will first go on to some current challenges in terms of why gig economy is, or why work in the gig economy can be seen as precarious, what's the current scope of regulation, and why is it so difficult to create workers' voice in such highly individualized working conditions. Then I will review some bargaining initiatives that have been collected by a co-author, Maria Grazia Lamanis, with whom I'm currently working on a book chapter on collective bargaining for the food delivery sector, so platform-based food delivery sector. And I will also show some very preliminary analysis of the content of collective agreements. And finally, I will conclude with a discussion or raise questions also for our later panel discussion on the resources that are there to regulate the platform economy. So legislation, collective bargaining versus other regulatory tools and efforts. Going straight into the defining concepts and challenges that we face in the platform economy, the precarity, the concept of precarious work from the literature has been defined as a multi-dimensional concept, and precarity can relate to irregular working time or unpredictable working time, varying pay, where workers often cannot influence their own pay. It depends a lot on the algorithms, how the work is allocated. This has implications for job stability. Often the training opportunities and professional promotion are also raised as a challenge in the platform economy. And of course, the right to organize and the representing the interests of platform workers in such highly fragmented working environment. And finally, also in terms of occupational health and safety, there is not yet kind of an overarching approach how to make sure that all the standards are met and applied also for platform workers. In terms of the regulatory effort, the biggest question under discussion is whether gig workers are employees, are they entrepreneurs, or are they something in between? So should they have some kind of a third dedicated status in labor law? What is also an issue is that gig work is very often exercised across borders, online, globally, while the employment regulation is embedded very deeply in national legislation. So there is often a clash between the specific national legislation versus the kind of the work that internet and the technology allows gig workers to operate globally. When we look at the Europe specifically, there are some regulations and some directives, but most gig workers fall through the crack of these regulatory efforts. In terms of building voice, there's also research going on different on the ways how platform workers can organize. And here a big challenge is that very often platform work, especially in Europe, is a secondary work for workers. So they are more open to accept precarious working conditions because they have their social rights from their first job. This might be different in the rest of the world, and I hope in the discussion we can also open this question. But in Europe, this has been found as one of the reasons why there is a lack of pressure directly from the workers to build representation and to fight more strongly for their own interests. The examples we have collected with my co-author in looking at how collective bargaining is emerging, also in terms of covering platform workers, come from some European countries. And we see that especially Spain has been a front runner in specific legislation that shape the working conditions of not only of food delivery workers, but in general on artificial intelligence and the kind of the changing world of work under technology and the digital transformation. And in some other countries, we see Also being data protection rules being applied, such as in Belgium or the Netherlands. In Germany, we can go back to the traditional work of institutional representation by works councils. And there are also some efforts to do collective bargaining on behalf of platform workers, such as in Denmark or in Italy, and the formation of workers' voice in food delivery platforms in Switzerland. So this is a collection of the very preliminary steps. And we have also looked at, we have collected 30 collective agreements from 2016, out of which 22 referred to food delivery, because this was the scope of our research. And there is an additional, Wage Indicator is operating a global database of collective agreements, and they are also being coded for stipulations that refer to platform workers. So we will be doing some analysis on this database also. But currently, the 30 collective agreements that we have analyzed show that they are often not the full-fledged collective agreement that we are used to in other parts of the economy. Rather, they can be seen as a first step in some kind of gradual improvement. And they very often refer to the IT sector in general, and they can be seen as a door opener for more regulation via collective bargaining in the platform economy for the future. So they are by no means some kind of ready-made collective agreements that we could use as some good practice and discuss their potential extension. Very often the topics that collective agreements address refer to working time, pay, leave, different kinds of leave, health and safety issues, the transparency of the algorithm, which is a very important question for the platform economy, and the anti-discrimination clauses, such as a prohibition of certain ranking systems where workers are not aware of how the ranking is based, or avoiding the determination of shifts or allocating work based on some decisions or non-transparent decisions by algorithms instead of humans. Still, the bargaining coverage of these agreements is very low. And what is interesting to look at, as I already mentioned, is the question to what extent these agreements can be extended to cover also self-employed gig workers, or to what extent they are only valid for those who have an employee status, that they work for a company which then operates via a platform. So to conclude from this very preliminary research, the question is whether these findings mean that there is a potential for more collective bargaining in the gig economy. And we will know that by continuing analyzing collective agreements. And the concern about the employment status is still one of the key factors to making collective bargaining work in the gig economy and to expand bargaining coverage. And although we see some improvements thanks to the existing collective agreements, there is still a long way to say that, yes, collective bargaining is there to be the main mechanism for fair and decent working conditions in the platform agreements. And there are still a number of issues which are not sufficiently addressed in collective agreements, such as data portability, algorithmic transparency. There is a publication, by the way, forthcoming by Uni Europa. There will be a launch event on 29th of March on a report that we have done together, all of us, or almost all of us that are here in the room and on Zoom, where we go more closely on regulations related to algorithmic management in collective agreements. So to expand this argument a bit broadly, what the implications are of the findings is that we see that collective agreements can be useful, but most often they are useful if they operate jointly with other regulatory tools at a higher level. The question is, what are these tools and what can be regulated? As we've already heard from Iftikhar's presentation, the question of discrimination, illegal labor brokering, exploitation, lack of accountability of platforms These are all issues that relate to some core rights of workers in the gig economy, and there are some first steps to address these rights, both in legislation, in collective agreements, but also in some other complementary mechanisms, such as compliance tools, and we will hear more about that in a few minutes. And then there is also a question to what extent the gig workers can develop a stronger policy impact with so strong interest representation and collective voice. So this is all I wanted to say, and I think we are step by step moving towards a nice panel discussion. So thank you very much, and giving the floor back to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Marta. This is great. And I think it's the perfect bridge as well from Marta and Iftikhar's presentation to now Pauline, Daniela, and Nadia introducing our recently developed living tariff tool, because we have heard about regulation and policy to regulate gig work better, as well as what collective bargaining could do for platform workers. But we would also like to give platform workers themselves a better tool to understand and navigate the fairness in this economy, right? So I would like to give the floor to Pauline Osse, who developed the living tariff tool. Afterwards, Daniela Cecon will run us through the living tariff tool itself. And Nadia Palitasari from Gajimu, Indonesia, will introduce how they have launched the living tariff tool in Indonesia just this week, and how it was received by gig workers in Indonesia. Pauline, you have the floor.
Thank you. Will I look at your camera? Is that the best way to do it, isn't it? That, so because we are here in a unique setting, after 25 years of internet experience, this is the best experience ever. That the world is out there, and here we see each other live. We are here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in the room, which is fascinating. So why the living tariff tool? As Wage indicated, we started 25 years ago to set up databases to inform people in the world, whether they were men, women, young, old, whether they live in Laos or Colombia, Cambodia, Ghana, whatever, where. So we started with it first in the Netherlands, but now we're in 200 countries. These databases plus websites in national languages, they give information on minimum wages, labor law, salary information, sometimes collective agreement. They give a lot of information also on living wages. Living wages is information for, well, people with a boss, basically. So they have a relation. Living wages is popular among brands, for instance, because they want to install living wages throughout the world. So that's fine. Then you have other brands who focus more on farmers. They say you should have a living income. So then you have living wage for people with a boss. You have a living income for farmers, for instance, or small company owners, mom and dad companies. But what was really missing is having a living tariff for all those out there who have no boss. So basically all who are informal or are self-employed. In some economies, that could be 70, 80% of the workforce. So that group of people doesn't have any indication, any feeling of what should be the pay, the income, or the tariff. Therefore, we created it. And of course, we created it also for the gig economy, because there you have a huge workforce of kind of self-employed people. That living tariff tool is different from all the others because it gives you a dreamy insight in what you should get being self-employed. If you mirror yourself to people in your same country who get access to labor law. Usually, when you're a formal worker, you have all kinds of issues like pensions, all kinds of social security, working time regulations, and so. But being self-employed, you have nothing. So what we did in the living tariff tool is say, well, imagine you are, let's say, a worker, but what should you actually get? The result is usually that you get, or that you should earn per hour and per month, if you're able to make so many hours, at least a double amount of what you would get as a minimum wage or a living wage. This is what I would like to present now, together with Dani. Dani is the brain behind the tool. Let's say the technical and the data brain behind the tool. And Nadia knows everything about how the tool has been landed in Indonesia, where Nadia is from. Okay, so first Dani, then Nadia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. I'll share my screen. Okay. Okay, all good, I hope. Okay, yes, so I'll present really fast the living tariff tool and especially the calculations behind it. Okay, let's dive into it immediately. So this is our first page. The first thing, of course, we need to know is the country and the region our user is from. In this case, we are in Kenya. So this is what the visitors of our website in Kenya would see. So you see the living tariff tool is in English. But of course, depending on the different countries, the language is, of course, different. So first step is asking people where they live and work. Okay, so let's suppose I selected the region of Baringo in Kenya, and the tool already provides quickly a first idea of a living tariff. So this living tariff that we present here is region specific. So it's based on the regional living wage that Wage Indicator publishes. It includes social security and taxes, but it doesn't include any work-related equipment or work-related overhead. So it's really the basic living tariff. So this is a kind of a fast track if somebody in Kenya wants to know how much they should ask as a self-employed. But then, of course, the tool is more detailed. So you see below there's a question asking about the platform type. Okay, one very important thing. So as Pauline was explaining, the living tariff is based on the living wage that Wage Indicator calculates. The difference is that, as you see here below, the living tariff includes also the social security that is normally due by the employer. So while the living wage includes the social security and taxes that have to be paid by the employee, in the case of self-employed people, of course, we had to include the social security due by the employer as well. And so our starting point is this. So it's the full-time per month living tariff. Okay, the social security costs and taxes are recalculated each time throughout the tool because they are not fixed amounts, but they are percentages. This is also very important to know. Secondly, for the hourly living tariff that you see here, this is calculated from the monthly one. And we get to the hourly by dividing the monthly by 4.333 weeks in a month, and then by the normal working hours in a week, which in the case of Kenya, it's 45, but of course it differs per country. While the yearly one is calculated just by multiplying the monthly amount by 12. Okay, so this is the first page again. Let's say we are a delivery, we work for the delivery platform, and we are motorcycle deliverers. So we select first the platform and then the job. And there's a button here to continue to page 2 where we can have more details about our specific type of work. So you see here, it's this is the page 2 for motorcycle deliverer in Baringo. If our user wants to get an even more personalized living tariff, they can click on this button and skip straight to page 3. But for now, let's focus on this page. So you see different sections which can be expanded. So our tool is really super transparent, I would say, in the different components that we include. This is the first block, and this is defining the net living wage. Well, why the net? Because, of course, as I explained, social security and taxes are percentages, so they have to be added at the end. So once we we have a full amount, a full net amount. So before we saw the gross amount, from that yearly amount, we deduct taxes and social security, and we get to our starting net amount, which is this, this one. Using again the 45 hours per week, we get to an hourly net living wage of 181 shillings per hour. But of course, this is assuming 286 days of work per year, which is not what, for example, an employee would work, because they would have paid festive days, holidays, and so on. So from our labor law database, we can identify the number of festive days and the number of annual leave days in each country. And these are subtracted to the total days, working days. So the new total working days per year is 252 days, which in hours makes about 2,000 hours. So what happens here is that you see the net per year that this worker needs to earn is then divided by these new hours. So of course, the amount per hour will be higher. And we get now our net living tariff, that's 200 shillings. So we'll call that A. Second box is about the cost for equipment. So our tool has, as you can see, different costs that can be added, and they vary depending on the different jobs. So in the case of motorcycle deliverer, which we selected, we include, for example, the cost of phone data, power bank, internet subscription, and the cost of the scooter, fuel insurance, etc. And these come, so these amounts come from our cost of living survey. So it's data we collect in the different countries and regions. And this is again calculated in an hourly amount and in an yearly amount. So you see, we now have a bit of extra to be added to our basic net, and that's about 100 shillings. So we'll call this B. We have done the third section, and this relates to the overhead time. So time that we assume people need for administration, for training, the waiting time, for example, when you delivery food, and so on. So all these are job specific, and they come from desk research that we do, and interviews with experts. So we assume, for example, that a person would need 6 days per year for training, 3 days per year for acquisition, for example. So all these times are computed into hours, and of course, these hours have a cost. So we have now C, so an extra 45, 46 shillings that need to be added to our amount. So now, if we sum up the net plus the cost of equipment plus the cost of overhead, we get to a living tariff of about 360 shillings, which is still net though. So we have the last bit of the tool, which includes taxes and social security. So in this case, we actually maintain different databases with these percentages for each country. And this is really what the law assumes as a basic. So what is kind of compulsory normally for employees. So we have a certain percentage for income taxes, reservation for pension, and in the case of Kenya, also unemployment, you see here, and a bit of insurance for medical costs. All this makes up our D, which needs to be added to the net we had before. And this basically brings us to the final result of our tool, and that's the living tariff, like the gross living tariff. So basically what our motorcycle deliverer should ask per hour, and that's about 522 shillings. As I was telling you before, there is an option to go to page 3 where the tool can be even more customized. In this page, as you can see, the user can decide how many days per year of leave they want to have, how many days per week they're working, hours per week, and so on. They can also include extra costs. that they think they need to cover, or if they think what we calculated for, I don't know, insurance for their scooter is not enough, they can customize the amount here. Similarly, they can decide for a different, like more time, for example, for training or waiting time and so on. And of course, the tool will calculate a living tariff accordingly. Okay, sorry for being so fast, but if there are questions, we'll be happy to go back to each part of the tool if needed. And here there's a video and the web page where you can find all our living tariff tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. This was awesome. Hey, and Nadia, hello, you introduced this
Hello.
cool tool this week in Indonesia.
Yes,
Can you tell us a bit
Yes.
more about how that went?
indeed. Okay. Wait a second. So, can you see? Can you see the presentation? Okay. Okay. Hello, I'm Nadia. I'm from Wage Indicator. I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia, and today I will share the experience from the gig workers using the living tariff tool and how it can impact the future of advocacy to create a better working condition in Indonesia. So in recent years, gig work has becoming a source of livelihood in many workers in Indonesia. Almost like 6 million people working as a gig workers here in Indonesia. However, here, the gig workers are considered partners or independent contractors, which leaves them vulnerable as they do not receive the same rights and protections as formal workers, like Iftikhar said in his previous presentation. So the legal status of the gig workers in Indonesia is also still unclear, really unclear. There's no regulation whatsoever. The challenges are not just about legal protection, but also setting up their tariff is also a challenge due to complicated hidden costs that has to be calculated and also market dynamics. So as Pauline said, the wage indicator introduced the living tariff tool to address one of those challenges. So back in the end of 2023, while developing the tools, the wage indicators has conducted several interviews with gig workers in Indonesia to gather their thoughts and feedbacks on the living tariff tool. So from the academic standpoint, from the academic standpoint, the living tariff tool can serve as a reference to determine the upper, the living tariff tool can be served as a reference to determine the upper and lower limits and tariff rates for online taxi and motor drivers, while freelancer in the creative industry and tutoring, they have expressed really high appreciation for the tools because they say that the tool have saved them a time and effort to do extensive research to set up their standard tariff, specifically advantage for the newcomer to freelancing. And however, for platform workers, for example, like ride hailing, food and goods delivery service, while the living tariff tools provide insights into legal working hours and living wages, these workers often find themselves in a very difficult position because their tariff are already fixed by the platform regulation, leaving them with a very limited bargaining power. And based on the interview with the gig workers, the living tariff tool can make an impact on the gig economy in Indonesia in several ways. The first one is the tool empowers the gig workers to calculate the amount they need to earn a sustainable income that covers their living expenses. It helps the gig workers to negotiate for a better pay, for fair pay. It also assists those on the platform in making informed decision by comparing their ideal tariff with the platform tariff. And moreover, the living tariff tool promote a much needed sense of awareness among gig workers, which we also do this with well, we as in Wage Indicator do this by spreading the information on gig work, gig economy. So doing a campaign within those issues in our local websites and also some social media. And then, as you can see, we also have the Gigpedia to promote the gig economy issues and advocacy. So this awareness hopefully can motivate motivate them to join the trade union, and through these unions, the gig workers can advocate for regulation that protect their rights. And okay, so I think this has already been touched by Iftikhar, but this is what what we have just launched the Living Tariff Tool yesterday. And then through the webinar discussion, we came up with several recommendations on the future advocacy that we would like to do and further cooperation opportunities. The first one is we have market advocacy. So through impactful campaign, we would like to educate the consumers. We can put the pressure on both companies and governments to do a positive change with the consumers of the platform as well. And secondly, rights to advocacy. It is our responsibility together to urge the government, consumers, and the company and the platform to uphold these rights and ensure fair treatment for all of the gig workers. Next one is regulatory advocacy. So through mass action, petition, strikes, political movement, we would like to reinforce the importance of fair working condition and demand action from the policymaker. And lastly, economic and political advocacy, where we can explore alternative economic models, such as collective ownership of the platform as a means to address the limitation of the current gig economy in Indonesia. So that's about it. So in an essence, the Living Tariff Tool emerged as a positive drive, motivation for empowering freelancers and gig workers. So, so let's embrace the tool and work together toward a more decent gig economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Great, really great to see how this works as well. You got an applause from Fred. Yay! Thanks a lot to all of our presenters today. Can I ask the tech team to put our panel on the list as well? And hey, welcome, Martijn. To finalize this presentation session, oh, sorry, I have to be at the mic. To finalize this presentation session, we would like to also do a small Q&A with our panelists, but also we welcome questions from the people in the room. And Martijn, to kick us off, because you have been listening to the presentations which, walked us through the regulatory frameworks, the possibilities of collective bargaining, and as well as giving some tools for increased workers' voice. Is there something that you are missing in this debate?
Of course, there's always something missing, but I think in the end, it really gave a really good overview. Also, Nadia also mentions the solution on better working conditions is also a combination of different actions from government, from regulation, organizing, and more. But also, Iftikhar really showed really well that in the end, what platforms also do is they outsource the risk to the individual that was already in a precarious position, and it also really shows really well that in the end, it also really depends per region in the world, also what the wishes for the workers are. And what I also liked in what I think all three panelists shared, but also within the story of Iftikhar, is in the end it's about fundamental worker rights. So and then the question: do we need to have legislation, or do we need to have other discussion based on the way how demand and supply of labor comes together? So are you an employee when you find work via platform, but when you find work via, don't you have then any rights? So I think in the end, it's really important to really talk more about the fundamental worker right, and not only about people that are finding work via platforms. And that will also help also to think about how to build regulation, but also on what topics to focus also with collective bargaining. So do we do collective bargaining for worker status, or do we just trust law and of course enforcement of law to fix that? And then maybe we put for collective bargaining more the subject about the impact of technology on workers. Let's say transparency and algorithms and these kind of stuff. Because what I'm also afraid of, also with all these legislation discussions, I think in the end, the legislation is the problem. It's not the problem, but it's about enforcement. So because you see so many court cases being won by unions, by workers, just based on existing regulation. A nice example of that is James Farrar in the UK, in London. His court cases in the end cost Uber 1.2 billion British pounds, and it was all based on GDPR and existing labor regulations. I think we need to maybe think a bit more on what do we already have, and then when we see, okay, we need some more, then only to talk about that.
Thanks, Martijn. We have a question from Fred in the room. Please, Fred, go ahead.
Right. So thanks very much for a very insightful presentation to the entire team. Right. So I noticed that when it comes to the living tariffs tools, it's well stratified in terms of sectors, country specific, and all that. But then with the legislative initiatives that you are considering, the collective bargaining tool, have you considered having nuanced bargaining agreements such that, for example, what might work in some African countries might not work in other regions? Because when you show the map, for example, I noticed that for all of Africa, it was just about 3 countries that had bought into legislative initiatives. The question is, when it comes to legislation, have you considered having different legislations for different sectors and different countries? And for the sectors, have you considered prioritizing some sectors over others? All right, thank you.
Pauline?
Thanks, Fred. Nice question. The living tariff tool is based on the legislation country by country by country. So at this moment, we have 5 living tariff tools, but we plan to roll out to 145 countries at least at this moment. Then, so when we talk about legislation, then it's legislation in a country. So the Kenyan one is for Kenya. And so that is country specific, the legislation. So also the assumption for a bit of pension, a bit of social security, etc. So that is there, or working time, for instance, which is quite crucial. So it's not 55 or more, it could be less. So that is there. If it comes to collective agreements, it's different because that is always a deal between a platform or a sector and the trade unions. And that is not integrated in this living tariff tool at the moment. Later it could be. Another thing which is sector specific or more precise, occupation specific in the living tariff tool. When you're a rider, then we know that you need a bike, you need a helmet, etc. So that's included in your tariff. When you're, that's an online freelancer working on your laptop and doing all kind of translation work, then having the laptop, having the internet connection is included in your tariff, whether it's Kenya or Pakistan or Indonesia. So that's maybe answering your question. Yes, so we take it in account.
If I may add,
Oh, yeah.
sorry, so if I may
Go
add,
ahead, go ahead.
yeah, to what Pauline just said, is that the living tariff is presenting a kind of an ideal situation. So it's based on the idea that a platform worker, or in general a freelancer, should have the same rights as an employee in the working time, in the social security, in paying taxes as well. So it's basically trying to apply what normally applies to an employee to a gig worker. So, of course, this doesn't mean that the law is supporting this in that country, but we try to promote that with this tool.
So what I would say with the living tariff tool, especially maybe not per se in the northern part of Europe, because there people know that 40 hours a week should be the standard or kind of the standard. But in many other countries where you didn't have a job for a long time, or maybe only a job in selling pancakes on the street, but now you have another job by sending around parcels or whatever, being a gig worker there. Then step by step with this tool, you can see, but there is a kind of legislation somewhere in this country. So it opens up, hopefully, your mind in saying, well, it's not all bad. It doesn't have to be all bad. Together, collectively, we can think about claiming our rights. So that's the assumption, that's the hope. Of course, we know the reality in Cote d'Ivoire or wherever in the world in how platform workers are mistreated there. But with such a tool, step by step, you can say, hey, but this could be the case. And if you do that for all countries in the world, what we do, then you might say, it's not so crazy that a platform worker also get paid for the waiting time or get paid only for working 40 hours instead of 60 or 80.
And maybe to make a bridge to this conversation, Marta, when talking about collective agreements and how they could be useful in navigating this process even further, could you reflect with us on how collective agreements may also perhaps change to navigate the gig economy better?
Thank you. Collective agreements are often, they are seen as complementary to legislation, to even expand the legislation. And as I already mentioned, the big challenge related to meeting this role of collective agreements in the gig economy in a bigger scope is, first of all, the gig economy is global, while the legislation is national. It's embedded in national specific legal frameworks. Second, trade unions who have the right to negotiate collective agreements and to represent workers are still in most countries, they are only slowly adapting to the changing world that we also have people in various flexible positions in the labor market. So it's not all black and white. It's not just employees with an employment status that need their rights to be voiced and that need representation. And this is, in my view, a bit slow. So trade unions need to be more open and flexible to represent workers in general, not only workers with a specific legal status. That's another issue. And then the third challenge to the improving role of collective bargaining is that unions have income from their members. So if they represent a broad set of workers, the question is what happens to their income and how can they survive with what kind of funding? Therefore, they are interested in collectively organizing workers' voice. The living tariff equips the individual with awareness of fair working conditions, of their rights and of decent wages, which is a great outcome for the worker. But currently we need to solve how it relates to the fact that from the point of view of unions, there should be collective representation. So the question is whether the individual awareness raising and the individual bargaining replaces the more organized structures, or whether it replaces it temporarily, whether there is some complementarity, and that is also very, very country specific. And yeah, these are the questions we need to open up and not be afraid of them and keep them discussing as researchers and to create some kind of way forward.
Thanks, Marta. Pauline, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, a quick one, because we had a lovely example in Kenya where we presented, we were discussing the living tariff tool there and whether it was a good idea and how they would use it. And then all of a sudden, a guy from the trade union in Mombasa organizing gig workers stood up and said, well, but this is the tool for us to go to the government and say, look, we need better legislation for gig workers. So it is, so the tool itself is, yes, for individuals, but it gives you an idea how a system works, thanks to all the data which is behind it. And then individuals, groups of individuals, but also trade unions can go to, let's say, to the platform, but better maybe to the government and say, please, government, let's look at this and let's try to improve it. So it is a kind of, let's say, we use the internet to create a tool, a very complex tool, to show what is behind an income for a platform worker, or what should be a tariff. What any rich consultant knows already for many years. Thank God now it's there for self-employed and gig workers.
Thanks. Maybe Nadia, could you reflect on that a little bit on what you think would be the case of the use of the living tariff tool in Indonesia by unions and maybe also your government?
Yes. Okay. I would like to raise hands before. So, okay. Cool. So for the use of the living tariff tool, as discussed in the webinar yesterday, it's just so we don't have a legal protection here whatsoever to have with to protect the gig workers' rights. We only have like a tariff tariff for the online taxi and motor driver, and that's it. And that is not coming from the Ministry of Manpower, but coming from the transportation ministry. So we don't have the legal protection. So and the workers itself, so the gig economy itself in Indonesia is still perceived by the government, by the public, as a solution to the unemployment problem in Indonesia. So they are still thought that, wow, this gig economy is very great for us. It's it's offer flexibility and so forth. So yeah, but then more and more, the honeymoon period, especially for like ride hailing, transportation apps and food delivery, it's already gone. So people more and more are affecting with their rights and their protection. They feel like they don't earn that much anymore. So that is why people are more and more aware about the precariousness of the gig workers right now, more and more. But then they don't want to go to the union. They have their community. They have a lot of community for the gig workers, but only like profession community. It's not to what you call it, to advocate to a better working condition. No, they don't have that, but they only like a forum, a community to exchange information, and that's it. And we need to build that community and build it for raising awareness of how important the union to have the bargaining power, so they can bargain with the platform, and then they also can advocate for a policy for the government. Yeah, because like collective action, it's much more powerful than individual like negotiation.
Thanks a lot, Nadia.
It is Anderson. Okay.
Thank you. Martijn, can I ask you to finalize our discussion with a closing reflection from your side before we say goodbye?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, and also thanks for the contribution of everybody. It's really inspiring to see. I think in the end, some points. I think the first one, it really shows that it makes multiple ways to create a better environment for workers. So it's not a one-off strategy. And I think it's also with the contribution of Nadia before me. It shows that discussion also has many nuances. So about location, individual situations, but also the benchmark with the existing market. And I think that's really is missing in the debates and would make debate much better when we also put more focus on that. And that also brings us, because now the discussion is really on a kind of a vertical approach, like a silo. But what we now also see, it's more about a horizontal approach. It's about labor market. It's not only about gig workers working via platforms. And I think too long in discussion, we saw this as a self-regulation market. And we all know markets will never regulate themselves. So why would platform or gig economy do it? So I think we were way too naive for many years in that. And I think we need to change that. It's changing, but too slow. And in the end, I think last thing, it's also all about priorities. I make jokes or sometimes some discussion with policymakers and academics about, okay, before platforms, you never cared about precarious workers. You never cared about delivery riders. Now they're platforms, so they're centralizing a fragmented and invisible market, and now you do care. So I think it's all about priorities and also about lobby. And I think that's also what the living tariff can do. It's also a kind of a tool and a lobby instrument to show, okay, this is the bottom line that you need to pay. And they're now getting half. So there's something wrong. And you see this priorities also within regulation, like only in the European Union and European Commission. The platform regulation now is probably failed, or it's when it's there, it will be probably a really weak regulation. But another regulation is called DAC 7, DHC 7. It's a tax regulation on platforms. It already works. It's now being implemented. So that was no problem to implement. That was no problem to agree on. So probably we can agree on a tax thing on platform, but not on a labor thing. So I think we also then need to shift these priorities. And in the end, I'm happy to see also with the contribution of my colleagues today that good things are happening. And I think that gives us hope, because normally maybe in the discussion when you sometimes talk too much to only lawyers, you get a bit depressed. But in the end, when you see what cool things are happening all over the world, with the living tariff, with the tax agreements, but also with the platform cooperatives, there are cool things happening. And I think we really need to give these good stories also a stage, to give people hope and to show that it is possible to make a change.
Thanks, Martijn, for these closing words. And thanks, team, for the nice presentations and the introduction to the tool and your new upcoming work. Let's keep the conversation going. And thanks for the people in the room as well. Have a good day.
Thank
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.